My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of Rebuild NorthBay Foundation. This podcast is specifically designed to bring you people who have been through what maybe you have just gone through or that you are concerned about. We created the podcast How to Disaster to show you the breadth and depth of humanity in the midst of this really terrible thing that happened. I wanted to do this podcast so that I could bring some of the most amazing leaders that I've ever known in my life to you. You may have just experienced a disaster, and you may be looking around and you are dealing with trauma and the shock of it. And you may be wondering, I don't know how to do this part. And so we purposefully made this podcast into different sections and different topics of recovery so that you could pick and choose what would work for you at that time. So welcome to How to Disaster, and thank you for giving us your time. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster. In this podcast, we try to show communities how to recover, rebuild, and reimagine. My favorite part of this job is showcasing all of the literally hundreds of people that I have met along the way who are doing really important work in different areas. Today, our guest is Reno Franklin, and Reno is a lot of things, including a longtime board member of Rebuild NorthBay. I've really enjoyed working with him and listening to his perspective. He's also the former tribal chair of the Kashaya band of Pomo Indians. In addition to that, he has served as an Obama appointee at the national level to be an advisor on Indian health. He's continued in that position for a number of years, and one of the things I enjoy about Reno is in that position, what he brings to it is a history of being an EMT, a firefighter, and an Indigenous person. We believe that Indigenous voices should actually be made central to the issue of how is it that we can and should do forest restoration projects. A lot of times when we talk about fuel mitigation, people just see like, are we going to log everything or what are we going to do here? And I think, and I'm not alone in this is not my original thought whatsoever, that if we take time to actually look back in order to leap forward and to see how Indigenous people approached land and how they cared for it for many thousands of years, that we can actually find a way through a lot of our climate crisis in a way that addresses the need while also bringing back and sort of centralizing and honoring the contributions and perspective of Indigenous people. I'm really happy to have Reno with us today. He's a busy guy, and I know that you will enjoy him too. And so welcome to the podcast, Reno Franklin. Welcome once again, Reno Franklin, to the podcast, How to Disaster.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to participate, talk about the Native perspective to this whole thing. So thanks for having me.
Well, I really wanted to have you on for a few reasons. I've enjoyed working with you over the past 3.5 years. And, I've also been watching you be a really strong voice for the Indigenous people, and particularly for the Kashaya band of Pomo Indians. There is a distinct momentum and a need for us to look towards the Indigenous community in order to, how do we figure out land treatments and forest restoration that actually get us to a place where we are much safer, especially in this age of climate crisis and global warming. Can you talk to us about your work there and also your history, because you are a trained firefighter and EMT?
Right. No, I think I'll probably start off first by saying we're not the ones that screwed up this environment, but yet we're the ones that are being asked to participate in fixing it. And so therein lies a little bit of frustration. And a lot of that is around these invasive species that exist now inside of, our I want to call it WUI, right? Wildland urban interface areas. These are grasses that dry up and turn into fuel. Jack London was an amazing writer, but when it came to his selection of trees that he brought over, he probably never should have brought those eucalyptus trees, which are fire bombs, and contribute greatly to the duff on the ground. And so, you kind of look at things from a couple of different perspectives, and I don't really have much of a choice in that. No matter what, I'm hardwired to think Kashaya first. And so in that process of thinking like a Kashaya Indian would, we're looking at our environment and how that contributes to the overall fire danger that exists. And then, as an accompaniment to that, there's always, climate change and the dangers that, this global warming is just wreaking havoc on us. And so as the droughts continue and they're longer, and the temperatures slightly rise, these plants and trees that aren't indigenous to the area and don't have deeper roots, right? These grasses that we have now are not from here, and so they're shallow roots, and the native grasses have very deep roots, so they stay greener longer and are less likely to become fuel and as hazardous as some of these newer things are that haven't adapted to the climate. And it all just is the overall dangers that but first Indian tribes in rural areas, and as we all learned in 2017, it's no longer limited just to us that are in these urban areas, that are in these rural areas, excuse me, and that and it's hitting us in the urban areas now too. And so it's an unfortunate thing to have this shared concern between the cities and the county areas and tribal areas, but it's very much of a real thing we've been dealing with for the last I would say 5 or 6 years really in Sonoma County. It's been a solid 4.5, but then if you look at Lake County, right, with more than 52% of the county burning in the last 5 years, really that's 6 years. And that it kind of started, they were the example anyway for the NorthBay on what we can expect and what's coming, and then now what's here. So when we look at these types of concerns and issues as they come up, from a fire perspective, it took us too long to finally start to do controlled burns again. I love the fact that we're doing that everywhere now, right? But Indians, we've been using controlled burns for thousands and thousands of years to manage ecosystems. And I take the approach of better late than never. It's nice to see Sonoma County jumping on board. We've got a lot of really good fire personnel here and smart people that wanted to do that, but there's always a lot of barriers. Burning in the rural areas where there wasn't homes 250 years ago, 200 years ago, 150 years ago was a lot simpler than burning in rural areas today where you have a huge communities, and our friends, Cazadero, we want to make sure that as we burn, we're careful about the folks there in the Austin Creek watershed, as we're burning, and, as you see Geyserville is working on their areas now. You want to be smart in how we do that. Those concerns weren't the same, 150 years ago. Now we got to take into account. I think we're doing a good job of it, but we need more controlled burns, and tribes definitely have the ability to do those burns. You're starting to see a lot of it up in Humboldt County, where the Karuk and Yurok tribes are now doing large-scale controlled burns for the purposes of restoration of that ecosystem, but also for fire protection as well.
I think that also I want to go into the word restoration in particular, because I've certainly learned a lot in the past year about there's a huge difference between just, mitigating the risk and actually restoring the ecosystem, and that ecosystem, that ecology, and that restoration has to include the element of fire. What I would like you to do first is let's contextualize the history. So where we are is Sonoma County. And Sonoma County is much like Lake County, sort of we're showing things to come for most of the West. And as you know, we are scaling up to include 11 states in our charter as after the fire. I would love to hear the story of the Kashaya band of Pomo Indians in this particular area, and then talk about what does forest restoration look like, and what's it like to be, your whole life part of the Kashaya band of Pomo Indians, and actually have that moment when everybody is sort of centralizing all of a sudden, and prioritizing the methods and the paradigm behind how Native people manage the land.
Yeah, no, it's that's a really good question. When Kashaya people, right? We believe that we pick our parents, and so you always hear people say, "Well, you can't pick your relatives," and I always just kind of chuckle because I know, like, wow, they're not Kashaya, right? Because we technically we do, before we come into the world, and so we'll tell people that our path as Kashaya people start in the before world, very much before our birth actually happens, and then once we get here, we're blessed with what we would call Kashaya Tawi, which is the cultural rules and law and the things that pathways that we have to follow in order to honor our culture and our traditions and our ancestors and our tribe. And so we get a healthy dose of that our entire lives, and it's a blessing to have, our people on the Sonoma County coast, our ancestral lands stretch from the Wallala River down to what we would call Kabe Mali, which is Duncan's Landing, and then go inwards to Austin Creek watershed and up to Monorio and then up to Lake Sonoma, where Skag Springs was, which was a place of Kashaya doctors to heal people. And so, we're very much of a practicing cultural tribe, speak our language, maintain our environmental they call traditional ecological knowledge, TEK. So we maintain those teachings, whether it's got to do with our ocean or, our forests, our coastal prairies, which are very much coastal prairies, and all of the things that would make up the area that are Kashaya ancestral lands. So we still have our ceremonies, we have our roundhouse, very much a culturally intact tribe. And I probably would say, we're one of the few tribes that never assimilated. So in other words, we maintained all those things that make us who we are as a tribe, and aren't teaching our culture out of books or having non-Kashaya people teach us who we are. We very much know who we are, and it's a blessing to be a part of that. And it's also a little rough because our reservation is in a remote area. We went from about 220,000 acres of ancestral land down to 41.85 for 100 years. And were forcibly removed, not just from our coastline, but from our lands. A series of mass murders and hangings that took place in our ancestral area led to kind of a culmination of all things after the Russians, who we had signed a treaty with at our village of Matini, now Fort Ross, after they left and Sutter came in. We kind of went through a really dark period in our tribe, where our population estimates were well north of 12 to 15,000, and by 1906 in our early when they did a census for us, we were down less than 100. And so we're talking a very short period of time. When the Russians first got here in 1812, they left around 1846, 1848. In that little 30, 40-year, 50-year period of time, thousands of Kashaya people were needlessly and senselessly murdered in acts of genocide. But that's a history you don't forget. It definitely doesn't define us today. We're a thriving tribe. We've hit a milestone of more than 1,000 tribal members the other day, and kind of looking back at it, going, "Wow, this is just a beautiful thing to happen." Our land holdings have gone into the thousands now, so that 41.85 is no longer just the case, right? Our Stewart's Point Rancheria is now around 600-700 acres, and we have our Kashaya Coastal Reserve, and have expanded land holdings and cultural access throughout our ancestral lands. So we're really happy about that, but with always the threat of potential fire, and my great grandmother actually lost her in the 06 earthquake in Healdsburg. She was killed, but luckily, Healdsburg, unfortunately, actually didn't keep records of Indians because we weren't worth noting. And so there's no official record of her death in Healdsburg, but it is what it is. Love the people of Healdsburg. Didn't like some of the ones that lived there a long time ago so much.
Right. Well, one hopes for evolution, but in a way, it's like almost now we're in a circular moment there where we have to come all the way back. And, and again, one of the things that we push for is we want to continually amplify and centralize an Indigenous approach to land management. So take us to 2017. And, we have on October 8th, these terrible fires erupt in the North Bay. And one of the things that, of course, we learned is you don't serve every community the same.
Yeah.
While everyone deserves equal access to resources, actually ensuring that they get those resources and how they are delivered has to be bicultural, often bilingual. So talk to us about your experience with the additional background in being a firefighter and an EMT. Tell us your fire story.
Yeah. So, 2017, I was going to say some interesting events that led up to it. On the personal side, I was tribal chairman. My son was playing football and had recently suffered a very severe concussion, and so was kind of out of commission. And you're already sleeping lightly because it's concussion. You're worried about him, and it's just a number of things that contribute to what October is for Kashaya Pomo Indians, right? That's ceremonial time for us and our acorn ceremonies that take place in our way of honoring those trees and those acorns. This is just a lot of stuff culturally that happens, and then at the same time, a lot of other stuff that happens, kind of sidebar things, right? And all leading up till that night when the fires hit, and without getting too much into the initial fire story of my experience with flames around me and whatnot, I think it was just more about how we react to fire and how we reacted to that day, and so that night and then that day and the several days that followed, which were hellish. Our native community got hit really bad. We had relatives in Lake County whose reservations were burning. We had relatives in Mendocino County whose reservations burned and lost homes. We had people in Sonoma County who were fleeing from the flames and just trying to get away as quickly as possible. Quite a few of not just our tribal members, but other tribes in the areas, and and people that we all knew each other and loved each other very much. So that was a bit of a trauma to not wake up to, but to, that night I was up all night because the winds were heavy and a tree hit my house. And so we were more worried about that without realizing the fire was coming. So, kind of you go through the whole process during the evening, trying to help friends evacuate under just intense conditions. And then you go into help mode once things kind of got to a point where you could assess what was actually happening. And so for as a tribal chair, my responsibility first and foremost is to my tribal members, and I take that responsibility very seriously. My brother's our chairman now, and he does a good job of that as well. But I think the challenge for us was that nothing like this had ever happened, and there was no playbook to draw from other than experience in as a firefighter and EMT, years of emergency planning. But I don't care how much you plan for emergency planning, nobody ever is prepared for this widespread, large-scale just trauma, mental trauma. And so we immediately started into action. We deployed a number of our tribal vehicles, that we have federal vehicles, and we're able to drive out and just start handing out waters, going to large groups of people that were congregated, the veterans building, Safeways, parking lots, and school parking lots, and just praying for people and giving them water and whatever we had. Just a lot of dispelling rumors. People had thought that the fire had burned here and it didn't, and this place was evacuated and it wasn't. And then going into my tribal office and securing that because people just couldn't get in. And so, the first 72 hours was spent doing what we could, going to shelters, bringing people water and food, checking on our resources, both from Sonoma County Indian Health standpoint and also from Kashaya standpoint, and then securing our tribal office, and under duress, as I had an individual pull a gun on me that was trying to loot our tribal office. And so, and the looters, they came out fast and heavy. They were very quick.
I'm always confused by that decision. Like I'm just it never fails to, I mean, most people are great, but that's such a strange decision to go see as an opportunity to.
And it happened as Coffee Park was burning. Looters were in there trying to get into houses. It just is what it is. It's the ugliness of mankind transcends race, gender, everything. It's just gross that grossness exists, but it does, So after we secured those things, we decided that we needed to find ways, as reports started coming in, of helping people. So thanks to Margie Mejia in Rancheria, I reached out to Margie and asked for help. And she secured some funding for us that allowed us to open a resource center at our tribal office. And so we were the only Indian resource center that existed for quite a bit of time. And just started bringing in supplies, started bringing in, Indian people that were being displaced. And, we were able to open that relatively quickly. And seeing the shock on people's faces as they came in, and some of them were still wearing the pajamas because that's all they could escape in. These are people that you grew up with, that you love, Indian friends and family, and being able to give them gift cards that they could take to, because really helping folks that didn't know what they needed, because they didn't even know if they had a house, but in some cases they saw it burning, in some cases they were hoping it was still there. In nearly all those cases it was gone. And either way, they weren't getting back in for quite some time. So kind of just being able to give people food. We had donations come from all over the Bay Area. It's just, we had this group that was a Catholic group that came in at the same time as the employees of Hooters in San Jose. And so we had them both inside of our tribal office at the same time. And the Hooters folks were just amazing ladies. The Catholics were amazing people. And they both brought these huge donations of food and resources in together. And we were thinking like, man, we're really bringing everybody together for this. It was awesome. So, shout out to Hooters in San Jose, and shout out to the Catholic Church for looking out for Indians. And still love them for that, and we just had this outpouring from the community, and we set up ours because it was more Indian centric, and
that was my next question. I just am really hoping you go into how important that is to be a trusted resource, especially for any community that has a history of being betrayed by the government or afraid of the government. So talk about how important that is.
And so if you remember, I kind of started this off by saying that, Kashaya has always been a refuge place, always. And we have, and that reputation carried forward during this event, and that we had tribes who were, just looked to us for that guidance and leadership. There were other tribes that were doing what they could. We were the on the ground center for this and this purpose only, and our youth were there to help carry water and items out to elders' cars. We set it up so that people could come in, and we would be the first line of screening was our front office, and then that front office would hand it over to our tribal council members who were participating in this, and we would talk to them and counsel them. And then we had, traditional people there that could help pray for them as well. And so, we wanted the traditional aspect of it is who we are. It was never even something we thought about, but it was something that needed to happen. We ended up actually bringing in James Gore and his amazing wife as well, and praying for them in a traditional way too, and that was those prayers were made for all of our board of supervisors as they went through this process. But so, and to have a tribal community, again, Indians, we never will, we never should ever trust any government, whether it's county, state, or local, even though there are great people within them. It's just, it is what it is, right? And so to have a tribal resource set aside, dedicated to helping out folks was really, it was what was needed during 2017, and it was very effective. We had hundreds of people come in, and in all different shapes, and like I said, some just still in pure shock, some that had accepted their loss, and some that were just angry, that it even happened. And So we just continued on. We did that for a couple of weeks. We set up a resource center on the reservation as well, because overnight our population of 70, went to above 500 in less than 8 hours. And so, getting resources up there as well, because people are trying to escape the smoke and the soot, and the best place to go is the coast for that. And then spent some time reaching out to our Latino brothers and sisters who were having issues with state parks, who refused to let medical and food people come in to help, feed those communities of folks with, how should I say this, questionable immigration status, and not wanting to provide resources to them. So, at the time we had some county supervisors that were just horrified the way that the tribe was, that this information had gotten to us, and the need was there, as they were having an outbreak from food poisoning that was just sickening a lot of people and needed resources. And so, we were able to, as tribal people, help our non-Indian brothers and sisters and make sure that those resources were allowed, and that those people were talked to who had raised that, or brought that issue up, or were the reason for that issue in the first place. So a lot of work done, I think, on multiple levels to serve the community, right? And then, but always with the idea of we're serving the native and often the non-native community, but we're doing it in the way that a Kashaya Pomo is supposed to, in the way that an Indian person is supposed to serve.
So one of the things that the 2017 fires really brought, to the forefront of concern was, we know that the fire didn't really care if you were wealthy or not wealthy when it was blowing through. And 9,000 structures, after 23 days are gone. And so collectively, it was good from my perspective to actually look at Sonoma County and see that I felt like your voice was centralized. And I think in some ways it was helped by Supervisor Gore becoming the board chair, at the opening of our sort of recovery period. But I also want you to talk about, like, you have a history of being a federal appointee, especially in the area of health. And we are really looking at how do we amplify and support organizations like OpenAQ that are distinctly looking at where air quality meets equity. And so I would love for you to talk about your work at the federal level. And I'm hoping that there's a voice and a space for what air quality does in the area of equity, and in our case where we live, which is true in a lot of America, but there is a significant Indigenous population. They also need PSAs in their native languages. And so, how do you bring together your work talk formally about your work at the federal level, but also how are you integrating our fire response or fire issues into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's kind of across the board for me, because as a political appointee, I'm appointed to the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and so that means that we advise the president and Congress on historic preservation, and for tribes that translates loosely into sacred site protection in a lot of places. And then we also make policy and then enforce policy. And so, for that perspective, especially with the rebuild, they were rebuilding places that, were on top of burials, and were on top of, Indian villages in some places and in some instances. And that got sticky as they're trying to rebuild and dig down to remove all this soil. Those people should not have built that house where they built it in the first place. Shame on them. And it also meant that they were heavily impacting archaeological sites as they were removing those materials, because the house was very disrespectfully built on them. And that's something that the feds in this case had ultimate authority over, because those are FEMA dollars. And so that has to be used in a certain way. So there's that aspect, right? And how do we manage that across multiple instances? Like the Paradise was another one. I mean, it's even last summer as well. And so, but I think we've got that narrowed down. I think the big part is, when we look at like, and you mentioned air quality, if there's this thing called CalEnviroscreen, and CalEnviroscreen says what areas and what lands are, disadvantaged communities, and defines what a disadvantaged community is. And it bases a lot of that off of air quality. I was kind of wondered, like, they should probably update that for these, because the air quality in Sonoma County has been crap for a long time, since 2017, and the multiple fires that have existed since. That ash just doesn't go away, right? And so, are we then a disadvantaged community as Sonoma County that would be open to more funding for air mitigation dollars? And that needs to happen, but it's not yet. They're doing pretty good, but the tribal communities weren't considered disadvantaged, and there was only like 2 tribal communities that were considered as having bad air. One is Great and Rancheria, which no Indians live on that, and so we kind of chuckled about that. And another one was in the Central Valley, where they have huge air issues, right? But they have changed CalEnviroscreen to add that all tribal lands are now disadvantaged communities, and it opens up air mitigation for us outside of EPA, which is huge, because everybody talks about like equity, environmental justice first as being the thing that levels the playing field for tribes when it, and communities of color when it comes to air quality issues and other similar environmental issues. And then equity as being the ultimate kind of final solution that environmental justice contributes to, right? One feeds into the other. So building equity into how we treat tribal lands, how we treat communities of color, and what does that look like during these types of disasters?
I want to add something in here, though, because we have an answer constructed for the Federal Register. FEMA has put out a request for input on the Federal Register that's specific to the question of equity. And one of the things we've always said from the beginning is we do equity, we do sustainability, and we do resiliency. And so really like the lessons in how you do that. But what we're actually asking FEMA to do is we agree with how they have qualified equity, but we actually want them to include rural in that, because these rural communities, they cannot recover without a significant change. They have there's no equity unless it's recognized that if you're a county like in rural Oregon, you have 12 county employees and you've had a devastating wildfire, your chances of recovery without significant investment and the acknowledgement of that inequity are slim. And so I just want to note that we are going to publicly push for rural communities to be included, which will also encompass, we see Indigenous communities are often in rural areas.
Right. And so there's a number of tools for achieving equity, right? And sustainability is one, and environmental justice is one. But the one that is probably, you can never say it's the most important or most critical one, but one that gets overlooked frequently is resiliency in rural communities. And really that's what needs to happen. And it's not just tribal, but I mean, I'm going to talk about tribal first because tribal first, but outside of that, you think about the town of Cazadero, small little town, amazing people, great people, beautiful hearts. And the fact that they've been asking for quite some time for an emergency alert system, a bell, an alarm, something, and haven't gotten it yet. And we've had fires, been asking since 2017, and here these fires have come, and they've come really close to Cazadero, right? Their way of building, resilience was the Cazadero bulldozer crew. And it was a bunch of, really cool folks that are friends and family, and got on their bulldozers and cut fire line around that town as the fires were approaching this year. In 2020, this summer. And so, it's a great example of seizing resiliency where resiliency is not given. And but to build true equity, we have to look for opportunities to do that. And FEMA must look for opportunities, the state, the county, to do that for these rural communities and to help build those resources into those communities. They shouldn't have to ask more than once for the damn whistle. That's a community alert thing.
Yeah, well, and the technology exists. I have to say this a lot on podcasts lately. Gigi, Stop snoring. She's snoring. Like,
That's great. I can't hear it, but that's a good dog.
She does. This is why, so people are like, oh yeah, broadband. We're like, yes, broadband. We would like to see a huge investment in broadband, but also, resilience hubs are, all the technology exists. Amazon makes the portable Wi-Fi. And I interviewed people who live in Vieques off the coast of Puerto Rico. And, they have now 3 resilience hubs. And in those resilient hubs, they have walkie-talkies. They've trained people in ham radios, and they have the portable. Did I already say portable Wi-Fi? I don't know if I did, but they have them. And what they're doing is, so we're not asking for, in these little communities, like anything to be invented. We're asking it to be applied. Yeah. And it's actually a relatively small investment. So I hear you on that.
Yeah, and we're starting to see it more. And you asked about work on the federal level. A lot of it was looking at ways through the previous administration's dollars for COVID and this administration to open up doors and pathways into resiliency. And so we've done that in a number of different ways. We've done projects to create legislation to put line items in the federal budget to get backup generation for tribal health facilities. We found that none of them had it. It just wasn't something that they looked at and thought they needed, and now they realize they do. And so that was successful. And then, building in infrastructure projects and tribes. And so one of the things that a lot of tribes did was go after broadband and install broadband, or at least put in the ability to. So we have a number of tribes that applied for and got FCC licenses to put poles, broadband poles, to bring it onto their reservations. And those have been, really successful. But again, it gets kind of overlooked. Nobody ever thought we'd do that. So all the training and stuff that's available to states and counties isn't available to tribes. So, it's just like, it's like more work that we have to do. We did all this work to get this done. And it's like, oh, damn. So now we got to go back and, restart this part, because the operations maintenance, the OSHA safety courses for climbing those towers don't, that the tribes would have to pay for that on our own, whereas our state and county partners and city partners don't. And it was just because nobody ever thought we'd actually get the funds for the broadband in the first place, and for those cell towers in the first place. So, sometimes at the federal level, when you solve problems, you create more. And I think that when it comes to the wildfire resilience and wildfire rebuilding, we have learned that lesson over and over and over and over, is that, as we kind of, peel back the layers of the onion, it just gets stronger. And at some point, we're going to be at a level where it's like kind of levels off, and we can start to build on what we have. And I think, we slowly are, but we need more jump off points to where we can continue to do that. And I'll harp on it all day. Is resilience in urban areas. It's huge. If we were selective in the way that we put fire barriers in, right? One of the projects that they did last year in early 2020, late 2019 in Orville is really cool. They they worked with federal lands and put in these huge fire buffers. They worked with tribes to make sure that as a part of that, they weren't hitting cultural sites, and archaeological sites, and cutting into areas they shouldn't. Put a lot of work into it, built these huge buffers, and they were selectively placed throughout areas that typically fire would have charged through, Mark West Springs Road, right? And so, but this is in Orville. And as the fires last year hit, I've watched as those fires made runs at those lines, and it blocked it 100% of the time. People will never know exactly how the town of Orville was saved from these fires that were made. These fires were making runs at them, but some of us will, and we know it was a result of planning in the wildland urban interface that did it. And so, when we think about where does rebuild, what's our part in these, we can help educate people in these projects that have worked, rebuild Butte County or rebuild, Paradise. Let's get some amazing folks up there that have a lesson for all of us to learn, and getting them front and center and helping them to teach their lessons, right? Because tribes, we'll talk to you all day about what to do and what not to do. But collectively, when tribes partner with Rebuild NorthBay, partner with, Rebuild Paradise, and we start to have that collective voice, and we're not like, it's not like we're saying like, hey, we're, no offense to the city of San Francisco, but since '06, they haven't had the same kind of fires that we're having here, and disasters. Yeah, they've had some earthquakes and some bad stuff, but no large scale fires anymore. But when we start talking to people who have experienced it and live it and have successfully prevented it from happening again, hats off to the firefighters in Windsor who saved that town. But they learned some lessons, and they learned lessons from 2017. And at the end of the day, if we can't build upon the lessons of 2017 and the fires that happened here in Sonoma County, or the fires that happened in Paradise and in Oregon, and start to share those collectively with each other, then we're doomed to have it repeated again. So yeah, there's some really good lessons to be learned, and some really good strategies for fire prevention that are happening. And I love the fact that we're all sharing that with each other.
I think that's key. And I think that, it's why this podcast is about democratizing that information so that anybody who can get to it on any of the platforms, either on an Audible platform or on YouTube, that they take what they need. They don't need to take, whatever they need. And if it will helpful at that time, if it's helpful at that time, that's what we're trying to do. So I would actually so we have about 5 minutes left. And what I would really like to do is, what's your advice for it could be a public official, it could be an emergent leader, or it could be an Indigenous leader, or person who is in a fire vulnerable community. They've not yet been affected by wildfires, but they certainly are on their list. And, what kind of relationships could they build now? What kind of trust? What kind of practices? And this is also important for smaller county rural governments who maybe haven't reached into the wealth of knowledge and experience and tradition, the traditional knowledge of an Indigenous community, and sort of taken that into account. How to navigate that from both sides, from both the Indigenous perspective, but also the public servant perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing is, think like an Indian. And when I say that, I mean, talk to your elders. It's not like Indians are the only ones that have elders, and I, the fire service and emergency operations service, they have elders. We've got some amazing ones in West County, that have an understanding of fire behavior and topography and environment, and what time the weather is the worst time to light a backfire, all of that. Go talk to your elders and formulate a plan that is based off of your consultation with them, and starts there. So everybody's got to start this somewhere, and it's overwhelming, and there's a lot of snaky people out there that are trying to do like these crap plans for folks, that really have no intention of doing anything that's going to help. Talk to your elders first, and then when you start to develop your plan, find like-minded people. Don't find somebody that agrees with everything you say, because that's just not right. But find like-minded people who have a strategy that's similar, but most importantly have goals that are the same, right? Some people want to protect, parts of the watershed. Some people want to protect businesses first. Some people want to protect populations first, and then vulnerable populations. So, find ways to make partnerships and build these coalitions that are meaningful and can produce results that can be duplicated. And that's the biggest part. Is at some point you're going to get tested, and your relationship and your partnership is going to get tested. And if you have not built on a solid foundation, then you're going to find out the hard way that all that stuff you thought was cool was crap. And you don't want to find that out during an emergency. So,
if I can make a plug here, though, that one of my strategies is I avoid the heroes and the saviors.
Yeah, that's right.
And I look for the collaborators and the helpers, period.
It's the, and the fact that you said helpers is another big thing. It's just, I think that, especially for leaders, acknowledge your worker bees, man. Like, get out there and tell Jennifer you're doing a great job as the executive director, and remind her of that, and her staff. Reach out not just to, the fire chiefs in your area, but, you make darn sure that you're going over there and doing stuff for the guy or the gal that's sweeping the floors of the fire station. And don't forget that for the volunteers, sometimes it's moms that are washing their turnouts. Know your community and make sure that you're giving the praise where it's due. And then you look at the people who are long-term contributors to the health of your community. Look at Henry Hansel and make sure that you tell Henry, my God, dude, you've been doing this since 2017 and just put your money and your effort where your mouth is, and make sure you're telling them thank you. And none of us do it for thanks. We do it because it's the right thing to do. So your policies, Sonoma County Board of Supervisors in Santa Rosa City, and anybody else and any tribes out there, the policies that you make should reflect your love for the community. And if you're doing it right, then it does. And if you can, at the end of the day, say, I just made this policy and it's because I love my community, and sometimes it might piss some people off, but it's the right thing to do. If you can't do that, then you need to take a step back and go talk to your elders again. And I'm not an elder, I'm only 47.
Well, you'll get there. Now, I guess at this point I'm 51, so
you're not there yet. Yeah.
I know I'm not. I'm just making that up. Reno, it's been a great experience to have you on our board, and I really appreciate the perspective. And you have a social media presence, especially we've had a lot of events here, and so I always appreciate it when you sort of highlight who this land actually belongs to. If you can own land, but that's not, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that you seem to carry those two perspectives of how to work together with people outside of your tribal community in order to bring more benefit to everyone, and at the same time holding your tribal community at the center of who you are, and bringing that voice and amplifying it. So we're always a big fan of amplifying people and systems and ideas that are solid. And I thank you for all of your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I was on this thing when it was still burning. Sonoma County, Santa Rosa was still burning when we started this. I still remember the very first meeting. So it's wonderful to see the direction that you've taken us and to where we're at now. And I don't think any of us ever, when we first started, in fact, I know, we never anticipated that we'd be in a position to help other areas and bring that expertise out of Sonoma County and start to ladle it out to the other areas that are affected by these disasters. And so that's not going to stop anytime soon, unfortunately, but we'll always be here. Rebuild will always be here to help, and the sounding board. So I love that. Yep.
That's what we're doing long term. So thank you again for being on the podcast, How to Disaster. This has been Reno Franklin.
Thank you.
Fannie Mae, the largest provider of mortgage finance in the U.S., owns 1 out of every 4 loans in the country. You can find out if Fannie Mae owns your mortgage at knowyouroptions.com by using our loan lookup tool. This last year has been quite difficult, and making your mortgage payments could be too. There are options for those available that may have experienced a natural disaster, such as wildfire or the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the options available is a forbearance plan, where homeowners are given a period of reduced or suspended payments to manage a temporary hardship of financial standing. For this caused by natural disaster or COVID-19 pandemic, you could be eligible for a 6-month extension with a possibility of another 6 months after that. During the forbearance plan, the homeowner is not charged late fees. If you received additional living expense assistance after your disaster, and those funds have run out, you still may be eligible to apply for a forbearance plan. When your forbearance plan ends, your lending or servicer will contact you to see if you need assistance or are ready to resume making your normal scheduled mortgage payments. If you don't hear from them, you should proactively reach out. If you are unable to repay the balance in its entirety, you may arrange a repayment plan, or if eligible, qualify for other programs such as a payment deferral or flex modification. A payment deferral allows you to bring your mortgage current. This option keeps your monthly mortgage payment the same as it was before your hardship, and the total deferred amount will be due on the last scheduled payment of the loan. Should you sell or refinance, the deferred balance is included in the remaining amount due. Flex modification is Fannie Mae's standard modification. Provides 20% principal and interest payment reduction on your mortgage, Once the modification is complete, the loan's term is extended to 40 years. Depending on the circumstances, the modification may result in a reduction of interest rate and/or principal forbearance. What is a principal forbearance, by the way? And that's when a portion of the unpaid principal balance, basically the remaining loan amount, is put into an interest-free balance secured by the loan as part of the flex modification. It can be modified by the maturity date or with an early payoff. More information is available at knowyouroptions.com. When ready to request mortgage assistance, reach out to your mortgage company. This is the company you send your payments to each month, and you'll find that phone number on your mortgage statement. Additional relief assistance is available through our disaster response network. Here, impacted homeowners can work with HUD-approved housing counselors to get help requesting financial relief through FEMA, insurance claims, and more. Homeowners can visit knowyouroptions.com/relief for more information or call 877-833-1746. Once again, 877-833-1746 or knowyouroptions.com.
Thank you for joining us on How to Disaster, a playbook to recover, rebuild, and reimagine. I want to leave you with this one thought. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we want you to know that you can get through this. You can recover, rebuild, and reimagine. But there's only one way you're going to do it, and that's together.